Namaste and good evening. I, Sadasivam, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav एवं नीति अनुसंधान संस्थान नई दिल्ली, extend my warmest welcome to you all to IMPRI #Web Policy Talk. Today, we have gathered for a panel discussion on the need for a national employment policy as a part of the series, The State of Employment and Livelihoods, #Employment Debate. The series is organized by Center for Work and Welfare at IMPRI with Indian Social Institute, New Delhi and Counterview. The moderator of our today's session is Professor Shyam Sundar. Sir is a professor at XLRI Xavier School of Management, Jamshedpur. It is my privilege to introduce the esteemed panelists for this very important discussion. We have with us Professor S K Sasikumar. Sir is a senior fellow at Giri National Labour Institute, Noida, UP. We welcome you, sir. Professor Swarna Sadasivam Vepa, ma'am, is honorary visiting professor at Madras School of Economics, Chennai. Professor Jayan Thomas, sir, is professor of economics at Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, Indian Institute of Technology, IIT Delhi. We welcome you, sir. Urvashi Prasad, ma'am, is public policy specialist at Office of Vice Chairman, NITI Aayog. Sandeep Chachra, sir, is executive director at Action Aid India. We welcome you, sir. We welcome all our esteemed panelists for this very important discussion. As discussants for this panel discussion, we have with us Professor Vinod Abraham, who is professor at Center for Development Studies, Thiruvananthapuram, Kerala, and Dr. Sandhya S. Iyer. Ma'am is associate professor and chairperson at Center for Public Policy, Habitat and Human Development at School of Development Studies at Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai. Now, I invite our moderator, Professor Shyam Sundar, to initiate the discussion with his opening remarks and invite our panelists and to take this panel discussion forward. Sir, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. At the outset, I would like to thank Dr. Arjun Kumar and IMPRI for initiating this important series and holding webinars on various important matters connected with employment, which has become not only an economic issue, but in a sense, a political issue as well. And the COVID-19, the coronavirus period has certainly intensified the kind of distress that people who are in the labor market and who want to enter the labor market, and that has created a tremendous sense of uncertainty for those who are in the labor market, and also apprehension and fear and hesitancy on the part of those who want to enter the labor market or who have withdrawn from the labor market for want of gainful employment or adequate opportunities. The labor market, I mean, taken conventionally, we would talk about employment or unemployment. But the last few years, we have started talking about underemployment and disguised employment. So the labor market scenario is dynamic in the sense the employment practices and the labor market preferences on the supply side and employment practices in the demand side have undergone tremendous amount of change. Added to that is the debate whether employment generation is affected by various exogenous factors like labor laws, labor inspection system, which are thought to introduce rigidities in the labor market, thereby affecting employment generation. So it has gone beyond the conventional boundaries as we have been educated in the 1970s and 1980s. Classically, in the 5-year economic plans, employment was originally considered as a residue. If you take care of output growth and economic growth, employment would be automatically taken care of. But from 6th five-year plan onwards, there was a revision and employment became central to the development discourse. And then we started talking about mainstreaming of employment into the development discourse. And the NSSO data and the PLFS data, which I'm sure the panelists will talk about, have painted a very dismal picture on the labor market outcomes. Unemployment, if one went by the usual status practice, marginally has declined from 45-year-old high of 6.1 to less than 5. But if we took the current weekly status employment, which is an acceptable international measure, then unemployment had stuck stubbornly at over 8%. And then, of course, one goes into that and one talks about, more importantly, the last 2 decades have concentrated on the jobless growth to job loss growth, and also the quality of employment. And it is why this panel discussion on employment policy, because India has ratified a very important ILO convention called Employment Policy Convention C-122, which was adopted in 1964, and India ratified it on November 17, 1998. And this Employment Policy Convention requires the ratifying countries to declare and pursue an active policy designed to promote full, productive, and freely chosen employment. And it is a matter of governance deficit that we don't have a national employment policy in place. But I know Professor T.S. Popola worked on the national employment policy sometime during the second half of the 2000s, and he was crafting the national employment policy. And I'm also privy to the fact that Professor Sasikumar and an ILO official were together, were framing or formulating the national employment policy, but which did both the exercises did not go through. So, and NITI Aayog, according to the website, had floated a national employment policy perspective in 2018. But when I browsed it, when I clicked it, it showed an error. So I do not know whether that policy document is there or it was a showcase exercise. At any rate, we need to have a national employment policy. And I just thought I would flag 4 or 5 issues which I request the panelists to consider discussing in the remarks. The most important thing is employment policy, employment generation can no longer be taken as a residue and output growth related. It has to be mainstreamed. It has to become the centerpiece of development policy. This is what Professor T.S. Popola and Professor Deepak Nair have argued persistently. So what is that? Can we do about it? In fact, 7th five-year plan talked about generation of productive employment as a central element in development. It is very significant that the 7th five-year plan talked about it. Of course, Planning Commission has been given a boot by the NDA government, and we have the NITI Aayog, and we don't have many policy documents on the NITI Aayog website, with due apology and respect to the NITI Aayog team. So can we mainstream and how do we mainstream employment in the development, as a primary element in the development discourse? Of course, we need to also talk about what is happening in the labor market. The NSSO and the PLFS data we can talk about the structural issues that have emanated. Professor Himanshu and Professor Radhika Kapoor have shown that for the first time, agriculture sector is the share of agriculture sector has increased rather than decreasing. And Professor Himanshu has said that the agriculture employment has increased in absolute numbers. And he says that the increase in the agricultural employment accounts for about 75% of the total increase between 2017-18 and 2019-20. So there is a structural crisis that is happening, which needs to be looked into. And of course, quality of employment is also important, because the proportion of workers, regular workers without social security is still very high. And we need to talk about informal sector, informal employment, child labor, and also female labor force participation, which is globally very low. And of course, we need to talk about the labor flexibility debate, because still it is doing its rounds, even as the government has passed the 4 labor codes, giving tremendous amount of flexibility to employers. Now, is there a scientific basis to say that labor law imposes rigidities and thereby restrict employment generation and affect productivity, etc., and thereby creating bad labor market outcomes? And also, we need to talk about the active labor market policies and the passive labor market policies. We have been largely concentrating on the passive labor market policies in terms of providing unemployment, severance pay. We don't have an unemployment allowance or unemployment insurance scheme in place. So we neither have, we have, of course, public policy, large number of employment generation policies in terms of promoting wage employment and self-employment. They can be called as active labor market policies, but can we strengthen the active labor market policies, and can government participate in the passive employment labor market policies? But most importantly, we need to talk about the concept of working poor, which Professor Sundaram, Professor Himanshu, Professor Hashim have talked about. The important, very striking fact is that the people who are unemployed and the people who are employed, they gave the concept of working poor. People who are working are the probability of being poor is far more higher than the people who are unemployed. This was what Professor Hashim talked about, and then Professor Sundaram and Professor Papola spoke about. So then we need to talk about what is the interface between employment and poverty. And these are related, because that is why we have the concept of working poor. Working poor was very much in the debate because of the NSSO data. Professor Jayan Josh should tell us whether we can extract working poor data from the PLFS. I'm not a person expert on handling these databases. And what should be the strategy of national employment policy, given the new context of COVID-19? So we probably need to reorient. We need social protection floor, and we need to talk about social protection. We need to talk about occupational safety and health. So there are several structural issues, there are procedural issues, there are outcome issues. So I think I will stop here by flagging these concerns and request the panelists to possibly address in their talks. And of course, they are free to free to execute their planned talk in the way they want. But here and there, if they could touch upon the issues that I have flagged, I would be happy, because I would think that as a moderator, I have earned my bread today. So something relevant I have talked. So with these remarks, I will stop and invite Professor Sasikumar, who is a senior fellow from Giri National Labour Institute. Over to you, Professor Sasikumar. Thank you very much.
Sir, please unmute yourself. Sasi sir, you have to unmute yourself.
Thank you very much, Dr. Arjun. Good evening, everyone. It's indeed a great privilege to join all of you Professor Shyam Sundar. All of us are known to each other for a long time. Very distinguished panelists and all the others who have joined for this discussion. It's really a privilege for me. And I would like to thank Dr. Arjun and the whole IMPRI team for providing me this opportunity. And as Shyam said, I'm also really quite delighted that IMPRI has been organizing very considered and constructive debates around developmental concerns and its public policy issues. Say, I must compliment you for that. Thank you. Now, let me come to the points that I would like to raise. Some of it is quite linked to what Shyam has raised, but not necessarily everything. First and foremost, let me start with the title of this particular panel discussion, Need for National Employment Policy. That is a start. Where do I start? I feel there is a very, very strong need to have a national employment policy. Not only from the perspective of what Shyam said, we are signatory, we have ratified the National Employment Policy Convention, but also it is necessary to evolve an overarching and coherent policy framework. Right now, it's quite disjointed. We need a coherent framework to basically to address the employment opportunities. There are opportunities on the employment front. We should accept it. We should go with a positive bent of mind also, as well as challenges. And I would go one step ahead and argue this is the most opportune time, most appropriate time. Why? Why do I say that? There are different factors. First and foremost, we have seen, technology is transforming the work and work relations. Transformations in the world of work is phenomenal, and it's going to speed up. I think, as Shyam said, the pandemic is giving a new, different kind of work relations. So we need to factor that in. The second, we know ever since 2010, that is after the financial crisis, there has been a slowing down in the global growth. Slowing down in investment, most importantly. And if you look at the trade data after 2015, WTO data, there are massive trade barriers being erected. Massive trade barriers being erected by the different countries, particularly in corridors which were, reaping the benefits of liberalized trade regime. And arguing that, as Shyam said, once trade picks up, employment as a residue just picks up. That's not going to happen, or that is not happening. And then we had the pandemic. Now we are seeing post-pandemic recovery strategies in different countries. And it's very important to note, even in the developed countries, the positioning of labor is changing. Many developed countries are increasingly using labor as a major catalyst to spread effective, to spur up effective demand through the minimum wage policies. So given that context, I think India should consider, evolving and, as I said, an overarching and coherent policy framework for what? What is the fundamental objective of national employment policy? It should be an employment intensive recovery and growth strategy. Employment intensive recovery and growth strategy. That should be the cornerstone around which the national employment policy should be conceived. Shyam said, we are a signatory and we ratified in 1998. Definitely, if you ask the question whether attempts have not been made earlier, attempts were made. Sincere attempts were made. In fact, I was fortunate or privileged to be part of that team for around about 8 to 9 years, 2007 to 2015 to 16. Some of the stalwarts, it's also a time to cherish the fascinating contributions of great labor analysts like Professor T.S. Papola, Professor G.K. Chadda, a lot of them, Professor Y.K. Alag, Dr. Rizwanul Islam, Dr. Shukti Das Gupta, they actually forefronted it. And in 2008, the Ministry of Labor, which piloted this, took it to the cabinet. But it didn't sail through. And I know why it didn't sail through. That was the time that takes me to the first proposition that, not the second proposition. First was that employment intensive, that should be the objective. The second proposition that I would like to make, and that is, that was the time when our labor force growth was increasing. That magical figure, that 10 million, 12 million was propping up. Quantity. Everybody was saying that we should generate, people were calculating how many employment should be generated in 1 second or 1 minute or 1 hour. And suddenly the entire direction happened to be on quantitative side. And Ministry of Labor and Employment were in a paradoxical situation. This was a ministry that was not generating employment. It was trying to create a situation of facilitating employment and improving the conditions of work and work relations. So it became a quality versus quantity, and the arguments which was extended. I had the honor of making some presentation to the committee of secretaries. Argument was, we are generating employment. India needs so much of employment, but you are trying to restrict it. So the whole aspect of quality started getting diluted. In fact, this can be very clearly reflected. I'm sure Vinod Abraham, who's working on this, would speak extensively on it. India's wage growth, actually real wage growth, started declining since 2011-12. The quality aspect, that got sidelined. And if you really want, the proposition 2 that I would like to make, if you really want a national employment policy, the first prerequisite is accepting that we need a balance between, restoring the balance between quantity and quality. We cannot dilute the quality of employment. We need to have or restore the balance between quantity and quality of employment. The next point that I would like to make is in the context of macroeconomic framework. Because national employment policy is not a standalone policy. It has to be synergized with other macroeconomic policies. So if you analyze the macroeconomic policies in India, particularly the fiscal policy, the monetary policy, the trade policy in the last 3 decades, what do we see? We see a policy framework which has excessively favored excessive use of capital relative to labor. What this has led to, of course, the strategy was use this as a strategy to boost investment and growth. Of course, growth picked up, no doubt about it. But it led to major distortion in factor prices. Major distortion in factor prices that favored capital intensity. In fact, there is an incentive to use more capital. Whereas there's nothing like that for using more labor. This you can see in the context of manufacturing. In spite of the fact that we have a national manufacturing policy and we targeted a big number of employment to be generated, even today, sadly, only 12%, I think 12%, Jayan and Vinod and others can correct me, I think 12% of the total employment is in manufacturing. And which sectors of manufacturing has grown? Capital intensive sectors. What is lagged behind? Labor intensive sectors. So what do you want in national employment policy or job-rich recovery? You want a situation where employment intensive sectors should be forefronted. There's no doubt about it. This is the best strategy for India. And for that, what we should do? We should have a sectoral diagnostics. We should analyze those sectors which has that employment intensive potential. Look at their production and factor use. Look at their constraints. Do a thorough, rigorous analysis and then take it forward. That is the next point. Now, we know the trends. The next is the contextualizing the national employment policy. Apart from some of the context that I said, is also the emerging employment scenario. We are a country where we have produced some of the best labor analysts. I think if you want to read on employment for the last 20 years, we have had some fascinating papers. Some of the panelists, Vinod Abraham is sitting here, Jayan Thomas is sitting here. They have done excellent analysis on employment. All of us as labor studies students know that high growth is there, low employment growth, hardly any employment growth, point number 1. Point number 2, pervasive informality. In fact, recent studies show using PLFS data, I think one of Vinod's students has done an excellent piece recently, which shows that the within the formal sector, the informalization process has picked up recently. Even within the regular employment, informalization is coming, even within the regular employment. As a consequence of which, the quality of employment is seriously an issue. Demographic dividend, everybody has talked about. Structural transformation. There was a time, we expected when agricultural employment was declining that, okay, this is moving, that's very good by. But where did they go and land up? They landed up in low-end construction activities. Construction now employs around 11% of the total employment. Low-end construction. So these are facts. We also know compliance. Shyam has done extensive research on industrial relations, labor law, in spite of the fact that we had some fascinating labor regulations. The kind of compliance, the kind of enforcement was miserable. We failed in enforcement. It is something that we need to address it. We need to, if you really want a national employment policy to take roots. So the context is very clear. Now we need a framework. And the framework that I suggest is that we should pick up 4 or 5 pillars, okay, around the national employment policy. Then in each pillar, we should identify some challenges and opportunities. Then for each of these challenges and opportunities to translate into reality, to address it or to strengthen it, we need some interventions. That's how a policy is to be structured. In fact, I had the lesson from Professor Papola on how to draw policies. I can really say, I've been grateful to him for teaching when I worked with him on the first national employment policy. The first document was phenomenal document. Phenomenal document. I know that very well because I was involved in it in and out. Then you identify interventions and then you have contours. Don't have, because it is to be implemented at the state level. You just should not suggest that this is what you're going to do. You can broaden the contours if you want. Okay, these are the possibilities. These are the experiences of certain countries. These are certain states. Then bring those in within the structure of the policy so that it becomes tested. So I would suggest 5 pillars to begin with. Employability, first pillar. Employment, second pillar. Social security, as Shyam said, social protection, social security or social protection. 4th pillar is active labor market programs. Very, very important. 5th, working conditions. There are, of course, cross-cutting issues like which I will talk at the end of my presentation. Employment, I can give illustrative example. Employability. It is a fact that the Tibet system in India has a very weak pyramid. We need to address it. Don't run away from it. The National Commission on Enterprise and Unorganized Sector Skill Report, the Sharda Prasad Committee report, they have all suggested umpteen number of measures to make it demand responsive. But we have somehow that even today, it's basically a churning out supply, which is not employable. And it's a very sad thing. It has an inclusive element in it. I once had a chance to evaluate the ITIs. Majority of the ITIs in India are in the backward regions. Majority of the students who go to the ITIs are belonging to the socially and economically disadvantaged sections of the society. You create the supply and suddenly you tell them that you are not employable. Demand responsiveness. Apprenticeship system. Again, a model that worked phenomenally well in countries which generated employment during the process of transition has not picked up in India. The state of instructors, people are just not talking about it. It's not very good. It's not very good. Yeah. That is with respect to employability. Employment, you already said low female force participation rate. Vinod has done excellent work. Shukti Das Gupta, Shervere, Santosh Mehrotra, they've all analyzed labor force participation rate. But I want to link labor force participation rate with new forms of employment. I think like that also is an opportunity. Technology is giving rise to new forms of employment, particularly platform labor. After the pandemic, I know there's an institute, a good think tank called Ola Mobility Institute, which is doing exceptional work in this regard, trying to assess the magnitude of new employment generated. This is going to be one of the major employment generation sector. So look at that sector carefully. Look at if they are facing some constraints. Say, address it. In fact, one of their reports, I think it's just about to be released or something like that, argues very strongly that platform labor promotion of platform labor can be one of the ways to scale up female labor force participation rates. The next point is social security. I think to me, the core is social security. It must be recognized that the existing social security system, which is contingency-based, employer-employer relation centered, is not working in India. It's not working. In fact, I would argue it's regressive. Those who are at the higher end of the occupational spectrum with very high income, who has very less insecurities, has the best of social securities. Those who are at the lower end of the occupational spectrum with less income has no social security. So we need to relook at the social security, say, systems, make it more work-centered, because self-employment still dominates the total employment, 52%. So we need to have social security systems which are distinctly different from the traditional social security, looking at social security only as a contingency and employer-employer relationship. Last 2 points. Active labor market policies. I think active labor market policies, 2 things in active labor market policies are important. One is public employment. In a country like India, public employment is very central. But I'm not arguing for a manual employment-based public employment. Care and education, particularly in the post-pandemic recovery state. Care and education are 2 sectors or services should be factored in within the public employment programs. And the second is public employment services. Employment exchanges did not do their function. It's well known. Now we have the National Carrier Service. Technology-enabled National Carrier Service should become the central pivotal point for job matching. There are limitations, but we should do such strong evaluation of such systems. And the last is working conditions. Working conditions has to be pitched in as a crucial pillar, particularly working conditions of vulnerable categories of workers, including migrant workers, Shyam was talking about the labor code, occupational safety and health code, which subsumed the ISMW Act, but then, which is supposed to be covering migrant workers, it's applicable to only enterprises which employ more than 10 workers. So there is an exclusionary thing. So the policy must fill this gap. Some things, the regulations will take place, but we need to go beyond regulations. Whether extending the regulation is the answer or having policies beyond regulations is the solution. We need to look at it very closely. And the last point is cross-cutting themes. Gender is a cross-cutting theme. Youth is a cross-cutting theme. Technology, in every pillar, technology should be centralized. And there's a general feeling when I go for training to workers and all, workers are detached from technology. Why? Workers should be treated as integral part of technology. On-the-job training must become mandatory. New forms of on-the-job training should start, not only in large enterprises. Create a facilitating environment for on-the-job training even for smaller enterprises. And monitoring. We have several national policies. National Youth Policy 2014, National Skill Policy. I have not seen much of evaluation and monitoring on these policies. Having a policy is one thing. Continuing and backing it with policy, that is only time we understand whether the existing data structures are sufficient enough to understand the movements within those pillars. So if you understand, okay, migration, you don't have a data. We realized it when it's a structural issue. We realized only when there was a pandemic. Suddenly we start registering. So that cannot be the case. If you're really interested in protecting the rights of the workers, from a rights-based perspective, justice-based perspective, we need to factor these things up front. That we are going to monitor this. These are the data indicators that we're going to use. And that is the only way we can make national employment policy work, which is the need. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'll be informal. Thank you, Sasi, for a wonderful presentation. There were many points that you made, but I will just pick up 2. You made a very interesting point that we need to restore the balance between quantity and quality. The figure of 10 million was floating from 1999 onwards, SP Gupta committee and Montak Singh Ahluwalia committee. In fact, this 10 million, employment opportunities was borrowed from the Chinese context. Anyway, we are trying to imitate China. So that is very important aspect, which I'm sure Jayan will be highlighting by using his statistics. Of course, you also said that employment intensive sectors need to be frontage. Of course, it also creates a kind of a mismatch between rising capital intensity and of course efficiency. All these problems are there. There are people who say that because of the labor market rigidities, capital intensity is rising. This was one of the major arguments put forth by people who adopted neoclassical perspectives. But most important thing that you said is the framework which should be built on certain pillars like employability, employment, social security or protection, active labor market programs, and working conditions. But of course, you also highlighted there three important points: that there cannot be a disjointed outlook between technology and worker. Worker should be integrated with the technology, and that is what we need. I mean, there is also a perception among the trade unions that there is an inverse relationship between technology and employment generation and their labor welfare. So is technology inversely related to labor welfare? That is something that we need to ask. And finally, we have policies put in place, but we don't have action taken report kind of a thing, monitoring. So that needs to be really monitoring. I think is one of the most important aspects that need to be in place in order to revisit the policies, in order to restructure the policies, etc. I think monitoring is the most important aspect, which will help us to have a dynamic policy making process. Thanks, Sasi, for raising this very important aspects. But the point that is missed out in the entire discourse is that if employment is generated, effective demand in the economy will automatically get enhanced, and that would create benevolent macroeconomic outcomes. That is a central point that needs to be revisited, reinforced, and pushed into the labor employment policy debate. Thank you very much. And I'm sure Jayan will bring a lot of data-based arguments on the employment policy. Over to you, Jayan.
Thank you. Thank you, Shyam. Thank you so much. I shall try to be brief. In fact, I shall try to build on what Professor Shashi was making the points. Let me also try to share my screen.
Yes, so you can do that. Please go ahead.
Yeah. And thanks, Arjun and IMPRI, for this opportunity. I hope my screen is visible now.
Yes, so you can go full screen.
Yes.
It's on, yes.
Yeah, in fact, the number was discussed quite a few times. So I think I will start with a number. I will just quickly go into, the points that I want to mention. I mean, our labor market analysis of India's labor market is important, I guess, from at least three dimensions. One is the fact that India is now at a stage where our working age population is increasing, the demographic dividend, and that is clearly a very important point. Just to give the statistic, India's working age population, that is in the 15 to 59 age group, will continue increasing till 2050, whereas for China, the decline has already started. Just between 2020 and 2030, the next 10 years, India's working age population will increase by 90 million, whereas for China, there will be decline of 70 million. So you can imagine that, there is this is a big opportunity, and also this is the time for India to grow. I mean, if this opportunity is missed, we won't have this opportunity in 2031, certainly not in 2041. So I guess that is the urgency part of it. Secondly, there is a shift away from agriculture, although the last 2 years, as per the data and most recent PLFS data is showing an increase in working age population, but the overall trend And the overall trend that we expect from a country like India, which is developing, is a structural transformation, is a positive structural transformation. Workers moving away from agriculture, not moving back to agriculture. And the third point is that, one can have questions about the quality of education that is being offered, but there is no doubt that after 2000, there has been an increase in enrollment in educational institutions, which also mean increase in job aspirations. So underemployed in agriculture, which was possibly an option a generation back, is certainly not an option today. So open unemployment is going to increase in India, which is very, therefore the question that we have to address is India generating enough employment, not in agriculture, but in the non-agricultural sectors? Again, the quality aspect which Sasikumar was mentioning. Are we generating enough decent jobs, not in agriculture, but in industry, construction, and services? We have done some estimation on that. I have not worked with the latest two rounds, but 2018, if you look at the data for 2018, PLFS data, periodic labor force survey data, and compare it with the survey that was conducted by NSSO, National Sample Survey Organization, in 2011-12, we find some interesting observations. This is even before the crisis started, the COVID crisis started, I mean. So much of what I'm going to speak here is data for 2018. Now, what we find, look at manufacturing. Manufacturing employment was around 56 million in 2005. It increased to 61 million in 2012. It did not increase in 2018. It actually declined by 1 million. And this was a time when ASI, factory employment, increased, which meant that there was a clear decline, a very big decline in the unorganized sector, the micro industries, the small industries. And if any of you have traveled to, many of us may have traveled, in this panel have done work in industry centers, and we know the crisis that has happened. The second sector is construction. Now, construction has been a very important sector for Indian economy, especially the period from 2005 to 2012 or 2011-12. In fact, construction was the sector which generated almost 19 million new jobs, and most of it in Madhya Pradesh, Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, Rajasthan, states where jobs need to be generated, and in rural areas of these states. And it actually created a big impact in terms of poverty reduction. But if you look at the latest, not the latest, but 2018 figures, you see there's a sharp decline from 19 million between 2005 and 2012 to 1.6 million new rural construction jobs between 2012 and 2018. Of course, there was some bright spots, which were the services. We don't know how bright it is. Female employment, mainly. It could be relatively low wage jobs in the education sector, health and social work, but clearly these are, but also professional, scientific, technical, and business services. These are sectors which generated employment. I just want to go to the main point which I want to make, which is the number which was referred in the previous talk. I have estimated what I describe as a potential supply, workers who could potentially work, who could be potential workers in the non-agricultural sectors, that is industry, construction, and services. This is, looking at the increase in the working age population, looking at the rate at which workers are moving out of agriculture, and also looking at the student population. So you exclude the student population, look at the increase in working age population between 2005 and 2012, also add to it those who exited agriculture at that time. India should have generated 14 million jobs, not 10 million, 14 million jobs a year. Every year, 14 million new jobs in industry, construction, and services in that period. We could only generate 6.3 million a year in that period. So we know there's this. Now, the period from 2012 to 2018, the crisis actually worsened. Our potential employment could have been much more because, given the increase in working age, given probably the greater exit from agriculture, our workforce in industry, construction, and services could have increased at the rate of 17.5 million a year, but the actual increase was only 4.5 million a year. So that's a big change. And I think, I don't want to go into the details, but this is the reason why we had a sudden increase in unemployment. Unemployment, the increase was largely among men aged 15 to 29 years, not among women, not among older male persons, older men. In the case of women, what happened was a withdrawal. So the response was different. In the case of men, for the first time, we actually see open unemployment. In the case of women, a continued withdrawal, probably a withdrawal at a much greater rate, much greater pace. We know now we are standing far behind China or even Bangladesh in terms of female labor participation. I think I will end the statistics part of it and what should be done very quickly. I think I will take another 2-3 minutes. So, clearly the COVID crisis has worsened what was already a bad situation. And I think the crisis has been not just in the terms of quantity, people losing jobs, but also in the quality of work. We said education is a sector where women found employment, but there are many studies which showed how ASHA workers' work has increased, but no increase in their remuneration, and so on and so forth. What we need, last point, given such a situation, we need a macroeconomic policy which allow wages to increase. In fact, what we are having, the response to the crisis has been, if anything, wages to decline. I mean, the way labor laws were changed, working hours have increased in many places, many states, from 8 hours to 12 hours. That will only reduce the real wages. But what we need, given the crisis, is a Keynesian macroeconomic policy response, which will help increase wages, and very much on the lines that Keynes or Kalecki argued. Even with higher wages, given the current situation, profit rates will not dip, but actually increase, because we could utilize our capacities much better. We really need to raise the consumption of and investment for the poor. We just need to note that the crisis in Indian economy actually started from 2011 or 11-12, when our investment as a proportion of GDP started declining. You see, in 2008, India and China were at similar levels in terms of investment as a share of GDP, how it declined in the years after that, and how that really led to this crisis that we see. So there is therefore very important, urgent need for more public investment. There is also need for credit support, among many other things, but at least most urgently, credit support for micro and small industries. If you just look at the red line, which is the share of credit received by micro and small industries as a share of total credit dispersed by scheduled commercial banks in India, and we see how the proportion declined from 15% in 91 to 6% in the early 2000 to less than 5% now. I think I will end here. What we need is public investment for equity, infrastructure, and innovation. The technology is also important. I can come back if there is time. We need a development model, given the migrant crisis, that is dispersed far and wide across the country and not something which is centered in a few cities. We need technologies that create employment, not technologies that displace labor. For instance, food processing or affordable housing. I'm sure everyone will agree that the multiplier effects will be very, very high. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity again.
Thank you, Jayan, for a very compact statistics-driven presentation. There are a number of points which raise concern. The most important, the 2 points that come out very powerfully is the picture of the future. I mean, we have the past about which we all know, but the point that you have made is that there is a tremendous, deepening mismatch between potential supply and potential demand for labor. I just calculated from the figures that you have given between 2005 and 2012, the employment generated, that is demand for labor mismatch was minus 7.9 million. But if you look at the 2012-18, it was minus 13 million. And and the kind of data that you have given about the future, saying that between 2020 and 2030, the picture that we are going to have, that statistics is going to create very grave concerns for the policy makers. And of course, you talked about, the very important aspect about youth unemployment being very high. And of course, the female labor force participation, which has been declining, though there is a slight spurt, I'm told, in the 2019-20, but we need more data to know what kind of what drove the kind of a spurt. But the lower female labor force participation is a matter of concern, and I'm happy that you talked about the increase in the ASHA employment. ASHA workers are not technically workers; they are volunteers. But of course, we don't have any policy for them, social protection policy or employment security policy. That's a very important one. But you made a very important point about aligning the macroeconomic policies with the employment policies, labor market policies. Unless the real wages grow, we cannot have growth. That's an important point. When real wages grow, and you also said that when real wage growth is not a threat for profit, capital accumulation. In fact, it will augment the capital accumulation via the multiplier effect through consumption rise, which is a very important Keynesian perspective that we all know, we have educated. And of course, the credit support to micro and small industries is the one that we need. And unless public investment is increased, you also showed the declining share of gross capital formation in the national product. So ultimately, it all boils down to three things. Number one, we need employment intensive macroeconomic policies. We need interventions for micro and small industries, and we need technology which creates employment and not displacing employment. That will also mean that the rising capital intensity needs to be tackled with. I think you have given two-pronged presentation. On the one hand, you have shown not only the past, but also the future by showing that we need to work on the demand side. We have worked on the supply side, but we need to work on the demand side. That's a very important point you made. And also, we need to have macroeconomic policy a good marriage between macroeconomic policy and the labor market policies. Thank you very much, Jayan, for the statistics driven, but also providing a kind of a path that India should take. Thank you very much for that. And I think now I would invite Urvashi, Dr. Urvashi, who is from NITI Aayog, to provide probably a government perspective, or Arjun says that you might talk about the gender issues. Over to you, Dr. Urvashi. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are audible.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, first of all, for having me here. It's really a privilege to be here among such experts on this topic. And really, we've already had a lot of insights and data-driven, rich analysis that has been shared. So I would just, like to make a few high-level points from the policy perspective to really just add my perspective to this. I think at the outset, just looking at the topic and very much echo the other panelists' sentiments that there is definitely a critical need as well as importance of a national employment policy as a broad overarching framework which encompasses and enables efforts at the state and district levels, because of course in a country like India, much of the action lies in our states, or even at the sub-state level going down to the district level. But there has to be some broad overarching framework which ties all these efforts in together and also enables a lot of the individual efforts that states and districts even make. So I think that at the very outset is something that I would echo, and it has been expressed by the other panelists as well in different ways. There are a few key reasons, why obviously I think that this is very, very important. And I think it's just important to state those. A lot of them have been stated, but I would reiterate or even add a few more to those, because those should also form the key ingredients of what such a policy should eventually look like. One is, of course, our major demographic trends, our population level factors. India, we often talk about the demographic dividend, but as many of us know, and as many people realize now, that the window is actually quite limited, and we also have aging, which is happening quite rapidly. In fact, in a few years from now, we would have even more significant population of senior citizens. So that is a very important trend, which is obviously playing out at the demographic level, and at the state level even more acutely. Most of our states in southern India have already started to see this aging in a very, very major way, and it's slowly going to play out across the country. The population level factors, of course, as many have already mentioned, which cut across gender, is definitely one of them. It has been a long-standing challenge for us, the female labor force participation, and it has been exacerbated in many ways by the pandemic that we've seen. It's exacerbated many of these existing challenges. It's of course also created certain opportunities, whether it's technology use, whether it's the possibility of more remote working, even though it might apply to a relatively small segment of the population still. But nevertheless, it has thrown up some opportunities which can also be leveraged or made use of systematically if we have that kind of an overarching policy and framework in place. The other very major aspect that I feel and certainly advocate for in my work is that a policy like this, it has to reflect the significant intra and interstate linkages as well as dependencies. And these are in various forms, whether it's in the form of demand-supply gaps or mismatches, or just inequities that exist in various sectors. Healthcare is a sector I'm very familiar with, so I'll give an example from there. That a lot of our medical colleges or even secondary, tertiary health facilities are actually concentrated in a handful of states in the country, and even within those states, it's a few large urban centers that actually have disproportionate number of these facilities. But of course, as we know that the demand for health services is clearly high across the country. And there are significant supply shortages in various parts of the country. So it's very clear that no single state or even a group of states can address such issues through their own policy interventions. A national framework which can look at this very holistically, and we do talk of it at the sectoral level, but obviously a national employment policy will go even beyond that and will look at interlinkages between sectors as well, which often get missed in the work of individual ministries or departments, and we grapple with the issues of them acting in silos. So I think this whole point about interlinkages, interdependencies, inequities, it really has to form the basis of an effort like this, if it has to really reflect the picture on the ground. And then, the last in terms of the factors that, or the ingredients, which I think, what makes something like this very important. And I think you mentioned this at the start, that the technology changes are happening very, very rapidly. And the pandemic has, of course, given a further fillip to those. The very nature of jobs, or the very nature of how we define employment, or what we considered employment, is changing, and it's constantly evolving. As I said, there's new challenges, but there's also new opportunities. So there has to be a way in which we can capture this. And of course, a national employment policy does seem to be one very effective, pragmatic way in which we could potentially do this. Now, of course, I would say, and I think this has also been stated before by one of the panelists, that any policy will only be as effective as its implementation, and I think there's several different aspects that will come into it. One is, what are the kind of institutional mechanisms that we're able to set up to make sure that such a policy can actually be taken to the ground level, can be reviewed periodically, can be monitored, we can make the course corrections that we need to make. So institutional mechanisms, both at the central level as well as the state and the sub-state levels, will become very critical, and how all of these coordinate with each other. I think that is one very, very big piece which will determine how effective something like this will be, and not that it just remains on paper. And I think an important part of those institutional mechanisms is the extent to which we can engage with stakeholders, because ultimately this is not just about the government. This is not just about the government looking at this issue. It has to be extensive engagement with a range of stakeholders in industry, obviously startups, civil society, various other types of organizations, which, because, as we said, this is an issue which affects everybody. And so the government by itself can certainly not come up with something as effective, or even half as effective as it would be if there are mechanisms in place to engage all these different types of stakeholders. And that is, again, something that that we really push for, and is also, of course, one of the mandates of NITI Aayog, is to try and enable this sort of engagement with a range of stakeholders across the board. The third aspect on this that I would like to just speak about a little bit, and I'll actually conclude there, is on data. And again, that's critical to the success or not of a policy like this, how accurately it reflects the ground realities. And that in turn depends to a great extent on the quality, breadth, and periodicity of data. Now, of course, there was an expert committee which the government had appointed, which had finalized the design of certain all India surveys. So there was one which is to be undertaken on domestic workers. There is one which is to be undertaken on migrant workers. Another one on professionals and the transport sector. And of course, the all India quarterly establishment-based employment survey. Now, of course, I think that there's a lot more that we can add to this, or a lot more that we can look for. But I think these are some important areas which we do need to cover, because official statisticians, as we know, depend on the PLFS. And it is really not adequate as a survey to gauge fully the sectors that the new jobs especially aim to cover. So these surveys, which were finalized by this expert committee, are to look at the large tier of jobs in a fast changing labor market. And we've seen new categories emerge, such as the gig workers. Again, something we spoke about, but there's lack of information from these unorganized employment sectors in particular. There's little data and insights which have actually held back the creation of such a policy. So data on this, the gig workers, the informal large segments of the job economy would be very, very critical once we have this survey data in, and of course it would need to be conducted at a reasonable periodicity. But these surveys can also give us the industry-specific data, and that is also one of the aims here. The survey on migrants, very, very critical. I think it was rightly said that we don't need to wait for a pandemic to realize that this is such a major issue, and not just the interstate but the intrastate migration that also takes place to a very, very significant extent. So the survey on migrants aims to do that, to collect information on migration patterns, job profiles, the living and work conditions. There's also meant to be a survey on professionals to capture the self-employed professionals and employees hired by them, for instance, doctors with a private practice and staff employed at their clinics. And then the transport sector survey, which is to take into account gig workers employed with the ride-hailing applications, for instance. And then the quarterly establishment survey is to track changes in the general employment. And finally, there's one on domestic workers, which is to give the first estimate of the domestic household workers, of course, most of whom are actually women and currently out of any sort of social security shield. So I think that, this is definitely an important step that has been conceptualized. It is underway. We are yet to see the results. We are yet to see how this can be taken forward. And as I said, there's a lot more that we could add to this, and obviously would want to, in order to get that fully comprehensive picture. But I think hopefully if we can take forward some steps like these, we would at least start to move towards a much more realistic picture of the ground reality across our states, across our districts, across different sectors, and across different types of employment and livelihood opportunities that we're talking about, because that is really something which has been a very, very major hurdle as to why we haven't been able to come up with something effective in the past, because we have had surveys, or we've had data which has actually been grossly inadequate in terms of both its breadth as well as quality as well as periodicity. So I think that if we can come up with this, if we can keep updating this data, if we can keep enhancing the scope of it, and making sure that there are mechanisms in place to review how effective it is into actually feeding into policy making and feeding into the policy levers that are designed based on this, it could be an important first step. So this is just some views that I thought I would share. A lot of these points, I, at least in my work at NITI Aayog, we do try to constantly bring these into our discussions with ministries or even with states, and feeding into this effort to coming up with a comprehensive but most importantly implementable national employment policy. So I'll stop here. And happy to have any discussions subsequently. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity again.
Thank you, Dr. Urvashi, for giving a very important perspective. I see that I see there are 4 important points that you have highlighted. I mean, that is the contribution of your presentation is to emphasize on even if we have an overarching national policy, we need to have a decentralized approach in order to know what is happening at the state level and even at the district level and even at the lower micro levels. So your concern and your emphasis on having a decentralized attention in the overarching policy is an important element that will deserve attention from the policy makers. Thanks for that. And of course, you endorsed Sashi's point that there needs to be in place an institutional mechanism to, and that too at the ground level, and that is again, you emphasize the decentralized approach to monitor and to have course corrections. Without that, a policy, having a policy in place will be a waste. In fact, it will be a disservice unless we have the monitoring mechanism. And of course, in line with the ILO Convention on Employment Policy, which says that the government should frame the employment policy after consulting the major stakeholders, that is the social partners, trade unions, and the employers' representatives. So engagement with the stakeholders by the NITI Aayog, I mean, that is a very positive signal that the NITI Aayog is sending, that we are here to listen to the various stakeholders, maybe startups, maybe civil society organizations, trade unions, etc. And that is a very important point that you brought up, which is extremely important and in line with the Employment Policy Convention of the ILO. And I deeply appreciate this particular aspect. And finally, you talked about the data. I'm happy that you talked about the data, and that gives me an opportunity to say that. I mean, you might probably, in your way forward, you might address. I mean, one is, as an academic, one is very much concerned, even deeply apprehensive of the segmented approach that the government has taken in having 5 surveys. So the point that we are asking is that if a private agency like CMI is able to have high frequency data, what prevents the government with the huge resources and extensive arms to create a high frequency employment and unemployment data? That is the question that disturbs us. And I mean, these are going to be estimates, and these are at the segmented level. Why segmented approach? Why it cannot be a kind of a aggregate approach? For example, the question that I had asked in one of my articles is that when there is an annual survey of industries and under the Ministry of Statistics, can there not be annual survey of service sector as a whole? Rather than looking at transport sector for that and professionals, can we not have an annual survey or even a biennial survey on the service sector? We don't have data on the retail sector. We don't have data on the wholesale sector. We don't know what is happening in the emerging sectors like the financial sectors, and all the insurance and the new emerging service economy, personal services, for example. And here I need to highlight this thing. I'm not able to understand the EPFO data, payroll data shows that India has added an estimated 20.20, that is about 2 million people in the formal workspace, and the growth has taken in the expert services, which mean private security agencies, small contractors, and manpower agencies. So, I mean, we are not able to understand why there is such a huge spurt in the expert services from the payroll data. So, that drives me to the question, why can't the government have annual or biennial survey of the entire service sector as a whole? If you kindly answer this particular concern of mine as a moderator, I'll be happy about it. But I'm happy that you put forth the government perspective that there is a critical need for national employment policy, and of course the aging population, etc., and the inequities in the healthcare sector. So there are a lot of issues that you highlighted. I'm sure they deserve attention. I thank you very much for giving the decentralized approach, which I liked very much, and the need to have a decentralized approach, while having an overarching policy. So that is very important. Look at the forest, but look at the trees also. That's a very important aspect. And with this, I invite Mr. Professor Swarna Sadasivam Vepa to take the floor and provide us your policy perspective. Thank you very much. Over to you, madam.
Thank you very much for inviting me as a panelist here. I think the discussion is very important, and we need to have a national policy document. Employment policy document is something which is very important.
Madam, a little louder, please.
Basically, I want to talk about, are you able to hear?
Yes, ma'am. Please go ahead.
Basically, I want to draw your attention to basically 3 papers. One is by K.L. Krishna and Walder and others, where they have looked at the various sectors and what is happening in these sectors over a period of time. And also the next important paper is by Arvind Subramaniam in American Economic Review, which came in 2019, where he was talking about why economic growth is commensurate with development as far as India is concerned. And he brought out very interesting points in that paper. And then I want to bring your attention about paper by David Otter. I mean, he's a famous economist, and he has been talking in general about the job polarization in the world. And what he wrote is very much relevant even to India. And these are the 3 aspects on which I just want to, give my some information, and also how we can use it for policy formulation. As far as K.L. Krishna's article is concerned, he points out that the total growth, in fact, has been something like 7.5%, say between 2003-04 and 2015-16 in India, and out of which the non-manufacturing growth has been something like 7.07. Agricultural growth has been something like 3.29, and the manufacturing growth was 7.54, and the market services growth has been 10.51, and non-market services is 5.87. And see, the non-market services were very important earlier, but what we exactly mean by non-market services is that the government employment, the employment in the sectors which are where the services are not purchased. And so, but that sector is also rather big because we have a huge administrative setup. For example, the government machinery and also defense and a large number of other sectors in which people are employed. And particularly, those of you who know history of India, India's economic changes, you know that in the 80s, the reason why there was a huge growth in economic growth in India is because of the expansion of the government employment. And so this sector is also equally important because we have not been taking people even into non-market services. And then the market services is one which is very important because it's been growing at the rate of 10.7%. And what is more important is that of all, and also the construction sector. So again, the non-manufacturing sector consists of 3 subgroups. One is mining and quarrying, and another one is electricity, gas, and water supply. And then you have the construction. All 3 together come under non-manufacturing. And then you have the manufacturing sector, in which you have various chemicals, textiles, steel, and so many other sectors are there. And what is happening is the manufacturing sector's growth has been quite disappointing. And whereas in the structural transformation, we expect after agriculture, manufacturing should become important, which has happened in all the Asian countries except in India. In India, in fact, it is the service sector which has been expanded. And now in the manufacturing sector, and we did not have a sufficient amount of employment. And now we also have just look at the employment shares of all these sectors. You find that the agriculture, of course, is still engaging 43.6%, and the non-manufacturing sector engaging something like 14.5%, and the manufacturing sector is engaging about 11.7% of the workers, and then the market services again engaging 19.5%. So market services is a very interesting past till 2015, where not only the economic the GVA growth was high, but also the employment growth, the share also increased over a period of time, and the productivity increased, and also the employment, actual employment increased. Both of them increased. So we can say more or less that market services happens to be the driver of the Indian economy today. And then, of course, the non-market services has been important earlier, but now their importance has been coming down. But even then, 10.7% of the entire workforce is engaged in non-market services. And now, another very interesting point that has been made is that what about the capital stock? What has happened to the amount of investment that is coming into the country? And if you look at the capital stock, the percentage of capital stock in various sectors compared to the total capital stock of the country as such, we find very interestingly that manufacturing has got about a quarter of the entire capital stock, that is 24%, and the market services has got a capital stock of 23.03%, and then agriculture has got the lowest, it's something like 9.66%, but 43% of the population employment share is in agriculture. Its capital stock is only 9.66%. So you know where we need investment. And then non-market services also has got 28.46%. It's also very high, but at the same time, the employment is not growing. And now, if you look at it, the most important point that is to be made is that compared to the amount of investment that is going into, the employment expansion is extremely disappointing as far as the manufacturing is concerned. And today, what is happening is, it is the profits that are actually driving the economic development. It is not the return to the capital, which in fact is negative. And it is not the employment growth, you know, and the people who are getting more incomes is what is not what is really driving. It is just the jobless growth and the job loss growth, and also the profit-driven economic growth is what is happening. And of course, I don't have the figures, but elasticity of employment with respect to economic growth, in fact, must have been coming down very drastically. So there's something very interesting to talk about as the market services are concerned, because the market services, again, are of two types. I mean, this is where the David Otter's analysis comes in very useful, because the market services, you have one hand, you have the high-end market services, like financial services, you know, software and things like that. And then on the other hand, you have a low-level market services, which are actually the personal services. And then what happened is, over a period of time, the technological advances have removed the middle level, and a large number of people who were employed in the middle level are no longer there anywhere in the world, including that of India. What happened is they've lost their jobs because of the technological developments that have taken place. A large number of people have lost jobs, and those people happen to be in the middle levels because technology can replace their services. Whereas when it comes to the low level end, that is the personal services, there it is not possible to sort of replace, technology cannot replace, and so they continue to be there. And once you have the economic growth taking place in the sense that other people can engage the personal services of the people at the lower end, the personal services demand increases and people get employed. But that happens only when the overall economic growth is very good. So as far as employment strategy is concerned, we have to definitely concentrate on market services, and both at the lower end and the higher end. And also the strategy should be how to bring back the middle level services which have been lost because of the technology impact. So like David Otter argues that it is only a sort of a temporary mismatch that the technology made some people lose jobs. And in fact, for example, I mean, some of the software engineers who are working, in fact, have shifted to became the Uber drivers, which was much more profitable because there's no more job there left in the software sector. The software sector has upgraded itself in such a way, a large number of things which people were doing by coding and others have been now done by the machines. And so these people have no more jobs left. And so what is important with the employment strategy is to sort of look at how to use technology to sort of leverage employment is something very important. And the other important aspect is, one more point I want to say about women's employment. India is a unique country where as economic development takes place, the percentage of women employed, actually is falling. In fact, the workforce participation is declining in India. And no other country which has developed, in particularly the Asian countries and as well as the European countries, the women's participation increased, while only here the women's participation has declined. It is because two reasons. It happened in the rural sector, it also happened in the urban sector. The rural sector is particularly happened because of the machinery that is being used, and in general, the drudgery jobs which are there are no longer needed to be done by women because they prefer to sit at home rather than engage in actual drudgery. So in a way, it's good that the jobs which have a actual manual work is involved have gone away is not a bad thing. But at the same time, there is nothing to sort of engage them. And that is the reason why after some time they try for a job and then they get disillusioned and then, call themselves as housewives or, staying at home and not in labor force, not even looking for work. And whereas in the urban sector, women's educational levels are increasing, but then the women's work participation is declining. Here again, the preference for when the job market is very tight and then there are not many jobs to go around, obviously they prefer men against women, and that's the reason why the discrimination in fact leads to a sort of a loss of jobs by women. So, and also in fact, we have to take into consideration a large number of employable women who are not in the labor force as a part of the unemployment pool. And that is very important because I think Sudipto Mandal has done that calculation very well. And that shows that a large amount of employable people, in fact, are not being employed because of the economy is not really creating jobs. And the other interesting, important point that I want to do is that a large number of people who are looking for jobs are not employable for the simple reason that they don't have the sufficient knowledge. And so skill development and matching of the jobs with the skills is very important. The skill development just for the sake of skill development has no meaning. So there has to be an absolute strategy of looking for where the skills are needed and they don't have people, and where the skills can be developed with the educational background of the people. So the real employment policy should have to really look at the ways of mapping the demand for skills and the supply of skills and the need for training. So this is something which is very important. And same with as far as the women are concerned, one has to take into consideration the entire employable women as a part of the labor force, which is which is possible to sort of to employ and then to improve the economic growth as such. So I stop here. I think my main point is about skill development and mismatch that exists. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Professor, for making important points with quite a bit of statistics. What comes out very clearly is that we need to look at the sectors that can create jobs, and we are not looking at it. It may be marketing services or it can be non-marketing services, but we need to look at them. And also you made an important, and of course the sectoral approach adopted by Professor K.L. Krishna on the basis of statistics is very important. I find it very interesting that that the non-marketing services, they were employment drivers in the past, but they are no longer so. But the marketing services are playing an important role and we need to concentrate on that. But the second important point that you made is that there is a mismatch between capital investment and employment growth. So, for example, I mean, you highlighted about agriculture. The capital investment rose by 9.6%, but it, 43% of people are employed in agriculture. So, in fact, we need investment in agriculture. That's a point that comes. So there is a mismatch between investment and employment, and which is very evident in the manufacturing sector. So that's why we have jobless and job loss growth and etc. But the point that you made is that which is happening in the IT and ITS sector is that technology is eating away the middle level jobs because they can be easily people can be easily supervisory personnel or others could be easily replaceable with artificial intelligence and others. And David Arthur talks about that kind of a thing. And the most important thing is that how do we bring back these people who have lost jobs? And of course, how to leverage technology and employment. And then you talked about women's employment, and you said that in the rural, and you talked about the plausible reasons for declining women's workforce participation. Of course, you said that the technology is is contributing by removing the drudgery jobs that women are doing, which is a good. But what do we do with the women who are displaced by technology? Manual jobs are going, but we need to find jobs for these women. In the urban areas, of course, we know that educational levels are increasing, but there is due to gender discrimination, their work participation is declining. So we need to bring in the gender. We need to gender the employment policy. And of course, you said that a lot of people who are looking for jobs are not employable. And we need to have skills policy in place, which also needs to be connected with the educational policy. I would request, Madam, to also maybe in your final remarks, is the new education policy, will it serve the kind of remarks that you made? Will it create, the kind of skills that the labor market requires? In other words, will it address the skill mismatch that we have, particularly in the urban labor market? That if you could address in your concluding remarks, that would be great, because you talked about the demand for skills and the supply of skills and the mismatch. So these are very important elements, and the most important point that you have delivered is that we need to genderize the employment policy, and we need to look at the skills policy along with the education policy. Thank you very much, Madam, for giving these insights. And now I request our final panelist, Mr. Sandeep Sachra, to give his perspective on the national employment policy. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. Professor Shyam Sundar, Dr. Arjun Kumar, Dr. Simi Mehta, and colleagues at IMPRI and esteemed panelists. Thank you for inviting me and having me here. I am the last of the panelists before we have the discussants on, and a very rich discussion has already happened. And I would not labor the listeners today to repeat or highlight some of the very, very important issues and crucial issues that have been mentioned. I would just speak to one specific point and a couple of dimensions to it, which I think would be the key context in which the national employment policy, which is really crucial, needs to be set. And this context is of questioning what has been said today, and therefore discussing and debating it, perhaps in the discussion time. The assumption that the mismatch between demand and supply in a transitioning economy, as we call ourselves, in a classical economic transition fashion, can be met outside of the agriculture sector largely. And I think that's the point the previous speaker to me, Dr. Swarna, Vepa, was alluding to when she talked of investments into the agriculture sector with reference to population, which is the workforce there in agriculture sector. And I think that is where the context needs to be debated and discussed. For me, the employment, national employment policy needs to balance two basic contexts: the context of the transition or the informalization that's happened, not on account of choice largely, and the outflow of people from agriculture through the channel of landlessness and through the channel of starvation of agriculture in the past decades gone by, to an extent that the peasant worker category or the agriculture worker category constitutes a large segment of what has just been mentioned as the urban workforce. And this was so very clear during the pandemic times. A reference was made to the fact that agriculture sector was almost a savior. I mean, those were not quite the words used just now, but elsewhere they have been used with gay abandon. That agriculture sector was the savior during the pandemic to the outflows of urban jobless workers. I am not going to get into ActionAid surveys which were conducted during the lockdown at the first wave of COVID, post the lockdown at the second wave of, before the second wave of COVID. And now the third round is ongoing on a sample of 16,000 or so informal workers transitioning both urban and rural sectors. And those surveys are available online. Dr. Arjun can share those links. And I think those tell a story of the extent of joblessness, the extent of what is called underemployment, what you referred to in your opening remarks, Dr. Shyam Sundar, the underemployment in the shape of number of days of work available, or number of weeks of work available, both in the rural and urban scenarios, and the extent of, therefore, the debts incurred, the implications of the same on education, the implications of the same on push-out factors, what Dr. Swarna was talking of. And of course, the lady, Dr. Urvashi from NITI Aayog was talking on the outpush to women workers, but likewise also the outpush to several other historically oppressed communities, be it the Dalit workers, be it the caste-based workers. Take for instance the performing artists, the street theater artists. Take for instance the Jatra and the Nautanki workers. Take for instance the cobblers, the barbers. I mean, they haven't had work for a long time, virtually. In any case, I'm not getting there. So I think the two contexts in which the national employment policy needs to be framed is, on the one hand, a premise and the enshrining of a right to work. So without a right to work, a national employment policy does not have the root or the teeth. And on the other hand, what I would argue for today is the need for a minimum land holding policy for those, or a right to minimum land holding for those involved in the agriculture sector. I mean, of course, this comes with a larger history of land reforms and land to the tiller. And thirdly, connected with it, the question of the policy of commons on which depend the livelihoods of millions of Indians. I'm not just referring to forests. I am in that same breath referring to pasture lands. I am in the same breath referring to water bodies on which depend millions of inland fisherfolk as well as coastal fisherfolk, but as well as grazing land and other such commons. So to me, these fundamental enshrinements and let me say completion or progress on these incomplete promises would give life and blood to the debate we are having today, the need for a national employment policy. So coming back to the challenges around the transition model, the question to be asked really, and the data here presented tells its own story, but the question to be asked really is, can the non-agricultural sector outside of the wider definition of agriculture sector provide employment to the existing workforce now, the reserve army of labor, what were called the working poor by some of you, or can it also provide future employment to those who are still being pushed out of agriculture? The government of India's own data is about 2,035 workers per day, and that's the story till 2011 census. We yet to sort of look at this census and see what's happened in this last decade with reference to push-outs from agriculture. One may very well argue that these are not really push-outs, but these are really choice-based, but that's not the reality. The reality is somewhere in between. So to me, therefore, these twin pillars of both creating reforms in the agriculture sector in the favor of the tenants, in the favor of the landless agricultural workers, in the favor of women who are predominantly the farmers of this country, in the favor of historically oppressed communities who have always remained or largely remained landless on the one side, would need therefore to look at existing land sealing laws, would need therefore to look at what's happened to Bhudan lands, a silent question now, would need therefore to look at possibly revising downwards in irrigated areas the ceiling that we had defined years and years and decades ago, would need therefore to create and discover those government lands which are in occupation at this moment by the trusts, foundation, religious charities, public sector industries, railways, defense forces, which are unused and which could very well be sources of livelihoods for millions of landless Indian peasantry and agricultural workers who constitute the bulk of what you now called the working poor of this country. So I think that's fundamental to do. On the other hand, it's also equally fundamental to create, in my opinion, a right to work from which should stem, on the basis of which should spring what is being argued today, the national employment policy. Of course, a Keynesian argument. Of course, a need not to, as in your opening remarks, Professor Shyam Sundar, you mentioned, not employment as a residual category, but upfront employment generation programs in the rural spectrum, but also equally well in the urban spectrum. We have argued elsewhere, I have argued elsewhere, to create an urban employment guarantee program on the lines of the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Program, and also to bring within its purview a range of other things which were mentioned earlier, such as care work, such as domestic work, such as work related to sharing of work burdens at home. So I think that's the context that I would like to bring here today, without getting today, since it has already been mentioned, into the specifics of what's needed by the way of decent and meaningful wages. We have not talked about it today. I mean, an employment policy sans a definition of a decent wage. We've had some revisions in the wage code, but I think that leaves a lot to be debated and discussed. Sans a definition of what's that floor of social protection. We have the processes to it. We have the constitution of boards to it in the revised or the labor codes around social security. But what we don't have is the quantum of social security, which would be made available. So I think defining those social security wages and social protection wages, defining the paradigm of labor rights, rightly you mentioned in the industrial relations code, how an enterprise below 10 can virtually do anything that they want. So I think those are specifics. I'm not going to get there because a lot has been said. These could very well be parameters which probably define the contours of a national employment policy. But I think we need to take a step back and look at what is the scan of this national employment policy and what therefore is needed to arrive at a national employment policy which will enable these conditions to flourish. I pause my intervention here. Thank you so much once again for allowing me the time to make my brief remarks. Over to you, back, Professor Shyam Sundar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sandeep Sachra, for, of course, taking the intervention made by Professor Vepa forward by emphasizing the need to strengthen the investment in the agricultural sector, which needs. But you went beyond the economic argument of the mismatch between investment and growth by looking at the political aspects of rural economy by asking the policy makers to look at the reforms in agriculture, which mean that we need to readdress the classic land reform policies that were discussed in the 50s and 60s. And people like Professor Ramya Kumar Bakchi, who held the view that Indian growth trajectory would have been different if all the states had implemented proper land reform policies. So that is something that needs, so it's not, employment policy is not just about, employment, investment, macroeconomics and others, but it is a political economy question. If I understood you correctly, Mr. Sachra, that employment policy is a political economy question. Can we have the right to the tillers? Can we have right to work, right of land to the tillers, right to work for people? These are the questions that we need to ask, the fundamentals. And you diverted the entire discourse from numbers and statistics to the fundamental arguments. Is agriculture pushing out? Why? Is it by choice? It is not by choice. It happens because of the structural and political economy aspects in the rural economy and in the urban economy. And of course, national employment policy should also talk about the right to work, which now is prevalent in the rural economy in terms of Narega Act as well as scheme. But we need, the lot of discourses have taken place arguing for an urban employment guarantee scheme, which Jharkhand, of course, talked about, and it sort of designed it, but it did not to go further. But your emphasis on the urban employment guarantee scheme should also figure in the national employment policy debates. And you also took cues from Jayan's presentation that real wages matter a lot in employment generation because of the benevolent multiplier effects that it can trigger following the Keynesian model. And you said that employment policy should concentrate on what you called as decent and meaningful wage. It can be a fair wage, it can be a living wage, it can be anything. Unless social protection is incorporated into the national employment policy, it will not have meaning. And of course, national employment policy again becomes a political economy question because it has to address the labor rights, and which take us to the debate on of the labor codes, whether they are strengthening labor rights or they are weakening labor rights. So it's a very important point that you made. Of course, the action aid, the surveys are very important for us to make them as ladders for climbing and having a peep into the empirical realities. But another important point you talked about, apart from gendering the employment policies, we need to look at the social, social aspects of the national employment policy in terms of looking at the Dalits, and the historically oppressed people, what is happening to them, that takes us to the labor market discrimination, and of course, the kind of reservation policies or the kind of policies that can address affirmative policies. So you have actually taken the discourse away from the mainstream discourses that usually take place, which use the labor statistics that is generated by the government by asking a political economic question: what about the rights to the historically oppressed people, agricultural people, landless laborers, and so on and so forth, and the people who are in the urban labor market who are unemployed. Thank you very much for giving a different perspective to this. And of course, now I will leave it to the discussants. I request Professor Vinod Abraham to come in. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Am I audible?
Yes. Yeah, you are audible.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Arjun, for this opportunity. Thank you, Professor Shyam Sundar, for moderating the session. Really happy to be here among this very learned set of panelists. I'll make it really short. In about 3 to 4 minutes, I'll try and place my some of the points that I thought it should be discussed in this particular forum. Most of which are either responses or kind of issues that I thought should be picked up in the discussion that we have already heard. Okay, so that's broadly that I want to, but it's not specific to any particular panelist as such. These are common discussions, and if there are responses possible, it will be interesting. The first and foremost, which I thought was very important in a discussion about national employment policy, is a discussion regarding policy space itself. What is a policy space within which we are talking about a national employment policy? What kind of policies can be imagined within a given policy space? Now, why I'm putting across this, historically, if you look at the Indian economic policy space with regard to labor market, it is not that we did not have any policy. We had been having very strong policy with regard to employment, right? But our employment policy spaces have shifted from a demand side policy, which we used to have very strong demand side policies, employment policies, which were very strong in the 60s, 70s and all. That has shifted away. Now, that particular side of policy intervention is not possible at all. It is not possible because of the various policy, the larger liberalization policies that has occurred in the economy. Entry into that particular demand side policy spaces has become almost completely impossible, right? What is available now is only the supply side policies, right? Now, even within the supply side policies, the government, the state, I wouldn't blame it as one particular government, but the state has been gradually withdrawing from the supply side policies also. Now, what the government is focusing on, what is the state focusing on right now? The state is focusing on managing the labor market. When I say managing the labor market, it is ensuring that there is enough information of both the sides available. It is ensuring that the demand information, the supply side information is available. It's trying to kind of manage the mismatches in information, right? And it is so for that they have a large number of what we call the new forms of what we call career services that has come in, national career services, the website or national career service websites that we have, interventions that is providing job certification, what we call quality jobs and certification with regard to jobs, a whole lot of programs and policies that is aimed at reducing labor market mismatch. Okay. And that is so over the years, our policy space has been shrinking over the years. Now, in this shrinking policy space, what is it that we can think about in terms of policy? That's something that we should be really concerned about. And how and why this policy space shrunk, that is an important thing to worry about. And in that light of the thing, the political economy story comes back. The decline in this policy space is basically because of the way in which labor as a question has been addressed by the state. And that labor as a question being addressed by the state, in effect, coming in through the question about capital itself. So basically going back to what Professor Shyam Sundar himself had been arguing, the question with relationship between capital and labor, and how it has been playing out the political economy of this, and how it has actually reduced the space for policy making for labor itself. So the policy space, that's something that we need to worry about with regard to the labor market, and employment policies. That's the first question that I thought, the first issue that one should be worried about. The second important issue that one should be worried about is, this has been raised again and again, but I think there is some nuance to be picked up. What is, are we really worried about employment, or are we really worried about livelihood? Okay, so we don't, I mean, employment is, yes, employment is important, but for what? I mean, we are actually wanting people to survive, right? People to live a life that is happy, and which consists of all the basics that is required, right? Now, why this question is important? It's important to ask the question about, when we were talking about technology question that were raised earlier, and also we already know what is employment. We are worried about employment because we are assuming that through employment wages will come, social security would be there, and it is through that we are and so there has been some discussion about that. Employment with wages, with social security, and that is important, right? No questions about that. But think about that population which may not get an employment, with education, with skills, may not get an employment. There is going to be a population like that, especially with the technology story that we were hearing about. What will happen to them? If they are not finding an employment, does it mean that they will not survive? No. So what I'm saying is that the employment policy should be having the mechanisms not only for workers, but those who are not working also, and those who probably will be thrown out from the employment labor market itself. And there should be security, there should be forms and ways in which this larger population itself is. Now, why I'm raising this is, we know that in many European countries, they have reduced the number of days of work. They have reduced the number of days of work. But reducing the number of days of work in Europe is a different story, because they are covered by some kind of social security. Think of the same thing in India. If they reduce the number of days of work, it will actually increase the burden onto workers. They will not have wages for those days, right? So that story can be very, very dangerous in case of India, right? And that was actually mentioned. The number of days in Action Aid surveys that he was trying, that Mr. Chachra was trying to point out, the number of days reducing is actually a distress condition. Okay, so we need to worry about this thing. Those people who are not employed, that they also should become part of the employment policy. They cannot be thought of as it is something outside of this thing. The third aspect is that, again, another aspect that probably provocative, but I think we need to see this thing. There's the whole question of employability. I mean, what are we calling as employability? If you go back and read a little bit about employability, the word employability was used in Europe in the early 1950s onwards. This word has been there, but the early use of this word was for a particular type, for a particular meaning, with a particular meaning. What was the meaning? That employment for every person cannot be assured by the government, because people are becoming unemployed, right? So in that case, every worker now should be having that skills which would ensure that this person can be employed at any time throughout his life. In other words, employability was about lifelong learning skills. That was the idea about employability, right? So it was actually a supply side argument. Today in India, when we are talking about employability, it is about this demand side. It is about the firms saying that we are not employable, that the worker is not employable, right? So we need to consider what is it that we are talking. Why I'm saying that it is not only that the definition has changed. I also want to take the discourse. I would place it that this is actually a discourse being developed around this thing about employability. You are actually saying that as the firms in a modern economy, as the skill demands keep changing, huge skill obsolescence. You have every year the type of skills that is required for a firm keeps changing, right? As skills keeps changing, more and more of the skill requirements of the firm will get externalized from the firm. What used to be internalized, what used to be part of the firm's production of knowledge within the firm, it is getting externalized every year, because of the technology that is available. Now, externalizing the kind of skills that is required would mean that more and more of such skills has to be produced either in the private sector through skill training producers or through the government sector, right? Now it becomes very easy to call it as a problem of employability. Now, think of just to reverse the question. If suppose the skills had to be given by the firms themselves, if the firms were going to give the skills, would you call that as that was a problem of employability, right? So it is a problematic thing, but I'm just placing it, and it has to be thought out whether it's a discourse. Okay, and I'll just place one more point, and I'll have to get out from here also. Sorry, because there is some other issue that has come in. So the last thing is about this question about jobless growth and job loss growth that we have been talking about, right? Of course, there is jobless growth. We have been hearing about this. And with regard to the manufacturing sector, the ASI data and the manufacturing sector, this is very well established about the story about jobless growth. But with regard to the overall economy, we should be worried. I mean, my own personal take is that though it sounds very negative, actually what we are seeing as jobless growth, or what we even call as job loss growth, probably is part of the structural change that is going on in the economy. And we should think about this thing before kind of getting too much worried about this jobless growth and the job loss growth story. Why I'm saying, just giving an indication about this is that if you look at the demographic transition that was talked about, along with demographic transition, what we are seeing is that, as it has been mentioned, number of children has been going to school has increased, number of people who are women who are participating in the labor market has declined, and what you are seeing is increasingly a segment of male-centered workers in the labor market. These are typical signs of structural change that has been seen in the developed countries that are today. Now, somewhat very similar changes that we are seeing in today. But yes, we don't see the kind of structural change in structural transformation in terms of the typical change in terms of service, agriculture to manufacturing to service. We don't see that. But in terms of labor market changes, it is very similar. So we do see that there is an employment decline. Okay, and there is it is along with this employment decline, the structural transformation actually led to high economic growth also in the developed countries when they were developing. So some discussion with regard to what is the kind of employment jobless growth or job loss growth that we are experiencing. That also, I think, so we should be able to problematize them. I will stop here. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm unable to go through this discussion further because I have to leave now for a personal note. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Vinod Abraham. I think in the interest of time, I will request Professor Sandhya here to start discussing. Thank you.
Arjun, thank you so much, Professor Shyam, and I think it's been a very rich round of discussion on labor issues. I just wanted to kind of flag in my points using the presentation mode. Dr. Arjun, I'm not able to share the screen. Is it possible? Oh, yeah. Okay. Just give me about 7 minutes and I'll be just raising. So because given the breadth of the discussion, I thought I put it all together and trying to take it. So basically, what are we really discussing? We are largely looking at the contours of labor employment policy within the 21st century framework, right? And I think what the COVID-19 pandemic has actually done is it has exacerbated the inequality in multiple forms and multiple spaces, not only in terms of whether we have understood the types of employment arenas that have got created, but also in terms of the very idea of job creation. And if you look at it from the perspective of who has benefited, who has not benefited, I think this is exactly the fault lines of the pattern of India's globalization, which has emerged, where the workers with digital acumen seem to have benefited and continue to be the people who have benefited the most in securing their jobs. Whereas those who are left behind in the very big outset of globalization seem to have been left far behind. So there seems to be a serious understanding that, what did we really engage with ourselves in the last 30 years? And most serious point is the issue of the conundrums that each speaker has very eloquently brought out. What are the conundrums? What are the employment conundrums that have come in? And since the focus has been on the issue of youth, education, employability, I think the PLFS survey has demonstrated that number of youth who are neither getting jobs, neither in education institutions, are all lying unemployed. And they're also not seeking jobs. This is a serious need problem in India. And again, picking up from the way we spoke, I think the question of sporadic employment policies, which are constantly being flagged in India for youth, for women, for SCs and STs, I think we need to remember that they are not add-on labor market members. They are equal participants of the productive process. I think we're constantly trying to drive in as individual policies and individual action points. And what is very interesting is, even as India is grappling with the climate change problem, talking about international solar alliances, our renewable energy sector and other sectoral policies seem to be going on in a silo. So isn't it time for us to really look at aligning India's development and employment policies together? The discussion has been extremely rich. I don't want to repeat each and every point, but most of us have come out with common ideas of where the problems lies and what are the fault lines. And I think what Professor Sasikumar did was a very significant, setting the stage or the discussion rolling in terms of the problems with regard to structural conditions in the labor market vis-a-vis the economic structural conditions and the social conditions. The interlinkages between technology and labor market realities have become glaringly visible, where technology is located in the capital intensive sectors and laborers seem to be left alone. There seems to be an equivocal understanding that social security needs to be revisited, whether we want to locate it within the narrow construct of contingency-driven policies, or do we really need to scale it up to engage with broader realities, which COVID-19 pandemic has said that we do not have food security, we do not have health security, we do not have housing security, and most critically, we do not have a foundational understanding of vulnerabilities that are grappling both the urban and the rural economy. And I think even as Professor Jayan has stated about the demographic dividend, I think there has been a common understanding that aging is also going to be a reality, and the demographic dividend is not going to be uniformly available to all states in India. Each state is moving at a very different pace. And what I found very crucial is the way in which Professor Swarna mentioned that wealth-driven growth, economic growth has become a reality. And profit-making or profit-driving processes are bringing about the change. So the wealth is not really trickling down to wages, and wages are not reaching down to well-being. I think that's exactly where we are all sitting. And I think the approaches which were laid out were very important, talking about, for instance, what Urvashi mentioned was developing a national framework for interlinkages, talking about data management systems, so on and so forth. The contours are very important in terms of where we are ideating the employment debate. Policies need to move beyond regulations. We need to focus more on localized problems. But by talking about local, we cannot forget how it is to be aligned with the national and the global, because we are in an interconnected world. Women need to be included, particularly the issue of unpaid work. Why is the care economy not being focused into? Why are we not understanding it within the larger employment labor policy debate? I think we need to focus on care. And I think even the ActionAid report, which was released recently, talks about how care economy will become the foundation for future growth rate in India. And there is a skill mismatch, agreeably so, but yes, assetlessness and tribal area is so important. And I was reminded over here about what Deepak Majumdar has written very strongly about the missing middle. India started with a clear-cut space where we did not have a strong middle industrial sector or a manufacturing sector. But as we have progressed from 2007 to 2021, we have reached a situation of closure of middle and lower market services and industrial sector. We just do not have it. In fact, what the COVID-19 pandemic or the post-2017-18 progress has done is it is leading to uncertainties, vulnerabilities, and closure of the low and medium scale enterprises, which is the heart and soul of India's labor markets economy. That is a point where MSMEs have played a very pivotal role. Our organized sector continues to be dominated by the public sector undertakings. We are having a very weak private sector. I think, I don't want to rub it in, but the Vodafone experience or the telecommunication experience recently says how the private sector in India is continuing to be extremely fragile. We need to review the strategies of rewiring. I think this is a second point I would like to really underscore. We need to have a rewiring of economic sectors, even as there seems to be calls focusing continuously on the global value chain. Where are we therefore in the 21st century? Can we follow the state-old understanding that the employer-employer relationship will guarantee workers' well-being? I don't think so. The very fact that we are talking about flexibility, we are talking about labor market flexibility over and over again, the new social contract of 21st century needs to move away from just freedom from want, which was the Beveridge Committee understanding, to more towards a freedom for dignified choices. We need to vest choices in the hand of labor. And that calls for recoupling the productivity debate with the growth-led paradigm across local, national, and global levels. The typical ILO contingency grant, contingency social security is not going to define dignity. And I agree completely with what Professor Vinod was saying, is that we need to engage with dignity of work. Even when they're out of work, their standard of living should not come down. If I'm not wrong, estimates which have come out from the World Inequality Lab says that in India, during COVID-19 pandemic, there has been a significant rise of poverty of the working force. And even there are considerable case studies available with us, which says that workers are today in streets as beggars. I think this is an alarming point where we need to understand that we have reached a rock bottom understanding of the notion of employment. And there cannot be a one-size-fits-all policy. We need to engage with the subnational levels. We need to understand demographic dividend and policy making at the subnational level. In India, in a paper which I've just written, we find that governments are competing with each other to implement policies in a very sporadic manner. You have separate policies which are being implemented by Madhya Pradesh, Uttar Pradesh, Rajasthan, Maharashtra, each competing to show that how important and benevolent they are towards the economic growth paradigm and equally treacherous towards the productivity notion of labor. So there is a serious issue. And more fundamentally, I think what the economic reforms in India has done is, from the question of employment, today we are talking about livelihoods, and we are mixing up our understanding of poverty alleviation programs with the macroeconomic employment policy making. We require poverty alleviation programs, but we need a substantive understanding of what jobs need to be created for a future which is more clear and driven with clarity. Therefore, there is a very important point, and I think I completely agree with all the discussions that were done, the rural-urban interlinkages, which are always being taught in classrooms, where migration was seen as a very interesting continuum between rural and urban economy, today is broken down. Our agricultural sector, our non-farm sector in the rural economy, vis-a-vis the MSME and the formal sector in the urban economy, seem to have lost their interconnections. We need to understand the overlaps and gray areas, because our migrant worker is visible everywhere, and he or she moves across these regions without a category. They're only looking for employment and dignified jobs. I found a very interesting paper in the European Journal of Labor Studies, which was the 2021 report, which talks of where Hajun Chan has spoken about the need to focus on capabilities, employability, and employment linkage. What he has argued is very interesting, and there are close to 9 good papers which have explained what has happened across all the developing countries in the pandemic period. What he is arguing is that the productive capabilities has made the increases in standard of living in East Asia far more durable than those found in countries that have achieved fast growth without a fundamental transformation of capabilities. We cannot keep the cart before the horse. In India, during the pandemic period, digital divide has thrown close to 40% children out of school. And now today, the government has also accepted, or rather the National Employment Guarantee Act has been cleared. So which means the education policy, the employment policy need to get twined up together. And therefore what he argues, what Hajun Chan says, is that the foundational productive capabilities, that is capabilities to learn technical and organizational solutions and apply them in creative and flexible ways, is the only way out. But in developing countries, this is going to be a challenge because we see them in sporadic points. The last few questions which I draw, and I think what today's discussion has thrown up, and I request the speakers to kindly draw their mind into, also is what Joseph Stiglitz has been saying, is that what are the enabling approaches? Because what Professor Sasikumar mentioned in the beginning is that they worked extensively, and stalwarts have worked extensively in shaping a new employment policy. What went wrong? How do we convince governments to adopt labor productive policies? Is it the problem only of the labor ministry, or do we really need to take it across as a larger, macroeconomic agenda setting? Second, how do we bridge the gap or the lacuna of sectoral gaps that have been spelled out as of now? The fourth question, what could be the framework that would compel enterprises to adapt labor conducive frameworks? If you see what has been happening in those states, even where labor time has been increased, you find labor absorption has not improved commensurate. Last but not the least, in a globalized world, can India do it alone? These are the 4 points which I want to raise, and any speaker can answer these 4 questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sanjaya, for making very important points. And in the interest of time, I think we will go for way forward. And I request, 2 panelists have left. Jayan has left, and as well as Urvashi has left for their own reasons. And we have the other panelists. So I'll request the panelists to stick, take 3 minutes and give their final thoughts. And first I invite Shashi to start. Please, the 3 minutes.
I think I won't take even 3, Shyam. Couple of very simple points. First is, I like the points which were raised by the discussants. Very strong points. The point that Vinod said about the policy space is very critical. Because we can argue on and on and on and say that we need a national employment policy. But do we have a policy space? I think we need to create a policy space. Because, say, we need to position employment as a reform. That is a very important thing. Because in this country, in a liberalized setting, we have had very strong policies at the monetary front, fiscal front, trade front. We have had policies. They have had both supply and demand interventions, no doubt about it. But when it comes to employment, we are losing that space. So first is integrating the employment policy with the other macroeconomic policy and positioning it as a reform. That is where you need to mainstream employment, that it will kick. And you should also argue that if you really want to benefit the reforms, other reforms, like monetary policy or fiscal policy, to reform, to benefit the people, employment reforms is the route for that. You have to create a space like that. The space on its own is shrinking. But then, do we agree with that, or do we position and argue? I would think that we should position and argue. That's the first point. The second point is about this question that Sandhya raised, a very valid question. Sandhya raised, both of them raised very fundamental questions. I think if we can incentivize capital, all kinds of incentive has been given for capital. Why can't you incentivize enterprises for employing more? What stops the government? What stops the government? You just, for example, I'll tell you, the MSME definition has been amended. You look at the definition. What is MSME always argued for? MSME is always argued for an employment proportion. And this is the central argument we hear. But then, what is the definition? Have we considered anywhere the word job in MSME definition?
Exactly.
We have not defined. We have defined MSME in terms of capital. We have expanded it. So we are again, existing policy space itself is getting consumed by capital. Let's create space, give incentives, have incentives for firms to grow beyond 10. There was an economic survey argument in 2018 that smalls are they're dwarfs. And they will remain dwarfs unless and until you give incentives for employment. It's very comfortable. Say a number of employment has to reduce. Incentivize, like capital, incentivize employment. The moment you say incentivize employment, we will say, oh, it's a fiscal burden. I have never understood this logic. Anything with the employment, that's why you have to argue for that space. And the last point is, and I liked all the points, this question of employability. I understand what Vinod is saying. Vinod is not there, but I understand what Vinod is saying. But the question is, say, employability over a period of time has been interpreted at different levels. Employability, see, in fact, ILO even brought out a ILO report on employability for training. I mean, where they reconceptualized employment and employability, where both it has a supply side as well as a demand side. If the question in India is, when you look at skill development or when you look at any firm's recruitment strategies, we have not talked about anything about recruitment strategies. Understand? Firm's recruitment strategy, say the question of skills are positioned only from a supply perspective. It need not be government-centered employability. It can be lifelong learning. Future of Work Commission talks about the lifelong learning as a very central aspect of India, overall labor being. You know, if you want to really be a worker. I liked lots of points told by other fellow panelists, but one point which probably we all missed is something to do with climate change.
Yeah.
I don't know. I expected, I'm not an expert on climate change. I think that is another factor which will bring, these are words sometimes, these are actually, it's going to impact the livelihoods. If you want to substitute employment with livelihoods or interchangeably use it, livelihoods and employment of millions of people in the coastal areas. And I also read a report recently where those who are moving out of the climate change disasters are moving to another area where there is a climate change. So this is another very, very, very paradoxical thing. So I think these aspects can also be factored in. But definitely I have not answered all the questions that the discussants raised, but very fundamental questions. And I think that mainstream employment, quantity, quality, incentivize employment. That to me, if you're talking of profit and incentivize, if you can say that incentivize compliance, incentivize employment. Why not? Why not? Okay, let me stop there.
Thank you, Shashi, for driving home certain important points. I wonder whether Professor Swarna Vepa is there. Probably she has left. So
Yes, sir. We have
Mr. Sandeep Sachra to serve. Over to you for your final comments.
Thank you. I think the question of climate change has already been reiterated just now, so I will not. I think that was one of the points I wanted to make, because we just released a report yesterday on the crores of people who are being ousted, not just, obviously from their livelihoods, but sometimes even out of their lives. And a cluster of those, as Dr. Sandhya sort of hinted, without using that word, are, and I won't get to use the word climate refugees, but purely the word refugees, because there's all kinds of sort of the refuge question, displaced people's question. So let's sort of say that that's a big issue which needs to be integrated. So it's not one parallel policy, as you rightly sort of completely concur with you. The second point, which really worries me, is the question of agency. So yes, policy space is nothing to write home about. There's a global shrinkage to policy space with reference to working people and a lot more. And so is the scenario nationally, and undebatably so, in terms of consultative processes, in terms of participatory processes. Take the instance of labor code and all of the labor codes. But also more recently, the Parliamentary Standing Committee's report on the effect of COVID on rising unemployment, and I think they also called it livelihoods. I think there are issues there, but I think the question really is not of whether we should occupy the space or not. Yes, of course, but who is this we is the question, and I think that is where the issue and challenge is. Because that policy space is where the question of agency comes in, and historically the worker peasant agency is something which hasn't occupied that space. There are several debates, there are several reasons, and we see steps towards it, we see instances of it, We see hopeful futures towards it. But I would like to leave this sort of short input of mine on a more hopeful note. I think that's where the hope is. So the political economy question, which Professor Shyam Sundar was sort of paraphrasing my little input, earlier input into, rightly so, is the point is about the politics of it. And that therefore is the sum and substance to it. I would argue that that's really the space where there is a vacuum. And as a result, there is not the political momentum. And therefore, you find capital in that space. You just said it, sir. I mean, who's occupied that policy space? It is the capital. It is the owners. The workers' share in accumulation, the workers' share in profit has been continuously falling. I mean, there may be some bips here and there. I'm not an economist. I don't have data at my, so please correct that data. But if you take this 3-decade trajectory, their share in the capital formation, their share in the profits has continuously been falling. So that trend we all know. And I think that needs to be contested. Otherwise, we can create national employment policies which will give further rise to that tendency, which has been dispossessing workers. I mean, our own survey talks of availability of 2 square meals a day. What are we coming to? We are now talking of actually giving 5 kgs or 10 kgs of ration to starving families. In this context, in this political economic context, I think the more push this agency can create, the better it will be for the future. This, and I will end it here, to me, the question of working peoples and therefore the connected question of land, because I don't think, and I want to say it, I disagree with the view that transitions which were followed by Europe, which happened in North America, which happened in colonial times, can be repeated without land reforms in our context. They just cannot be, simply because we must remember 2 things, 2 assumptions under which those transitions happened. You all have been sort of researching, writing, leading thinkers, but it's quite clear it happened under 2 conditions of colonialism, which therefore made it possible for export of large chunks of population into settler colonies, and conditions of what is called high-end manufacturing sector growth at the cost of colonies, which Marx has written a lot on, of how that manufacturing sector actually ran. And therefore, we can't replicate those conditions. To argue, therefore, for that transition model in the Indian context is a historical impossibility. And I will end by saying that it's also an ecological dead end. So in some ways, that's not going to happen. So our employment context has to be framed completely differently. I stop here. Thank you for a very, very illuminating interventions by all panelists, and particularly the discussants. Can't answer several of your questions. I think they remain as questions for the public discussion and debate going ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sandeep, for this. I would not take much time as a form of summing up. What is important, it's very clear that there is a need for employment policy, national employment policy, and we are duty bound to frame a national employment policy because we are signatory to the ILO convention. But the question is how and why and where. So different solutions, different angles have been given. And I mean, the most important point is that we need to reclaim the space for national employment policy. And we need to frame the policy on the pillars that Shashi spoke about, and also what Sandeep has spoke about. We need to look at not only the mainstreaming of employment policy by putting it at the center of the development discourse, but we need to look at various political economy questions. For example, we need to talk about the marginalized communities. We need to talk about gendering about it. We need to talk about the care economy that Sandhya spoke about. And we need to talk about the political economy question of capital labor relationship. So it's a very, very important and complex question. So I think that the most important point that has emanated is that we need to cure several mismatches that exist in the system. In the economic system, it can be a political economy question. It can be a simple skills mismatch question. It's about ignoring certain economy like care economy, or it is a question of capital labor relationship. But we need to talk about this. So it has been a very enriching session, and we need to address the concerns raised by Jayan in terms of what is going to happen between 2020 and 2030. So all these questions are important. It's not just about employment statistics. It is more about fronting employment policy in the development discourses, reclaiming the space for employment policy, and also having a kind of an umbrella approach and not a segmented approach. With these remarks, I will end as a moderator and hand the whole thing to. I'm happy that the panelists brought a range of rich issues, and the discussions also raised very significant concerns. I thank all the panelists and the two discussants for enabling a very important and very rich discussion. Thank you very much, Arjun, once again for initiating this important policy discussion. And over to you, Arjun. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Shyam sir. And almost supper time for everyone. So let me not take further time and propose the vote of thanks for this very important deliberation today. Panel discussion on the need for a national employment policy organized by IMPRI Center for Work and Welfare, Indian Social Institute, New Delhi, and Counterview. We thank all of our distinguished panelists, Dr. Sandeep Chachra sir, Urvashi ma'am, Prof S Sasikumar sir, Professor Swarna Vepa ma'am, Professor Jayan sir, and our discussant Professor Vinod Abraham sir, and Dr. Sandhya Iyer ma'am, and also our moderator Professor Shyam Sundar sir, and Dr. Denzel Fernandez sir and Rajiv Shah sir from ISI and Counterview respectively for encouraging us to have this discussion today. And thank you to all our panelists for joining here and illuminating us on very pertinent points, especially for the national employment policy. This discourse has been going on for quite a time, and at the time when we are weak, we are discussing about it, but somehow it is not moving forward. Last year also, Government of India made a 8 ministers committee to push this forward, but somehow it's not going forward. So we look forward to having more such discussions so that we can push this agenda for our new India and a strong India. Shyam sir, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, Arjun, I would request you to make take the main points of that the panelists made, and you can forward it to NITI Aayog and various other agencies. As very important inputs emanating from the discussion.
To the Ministry, Labour Bureau, all the significant people also have been sharing, to journalists also. We will do that, also prepare event report and the policy recommendation. And I think all of our panelists they have been working so hard on this issue. Sandeep sir also, Action Aid also help us so much to focus on this issue. So once again, thank you everyone. And please take care of yourself, and we hope to catch you again on our future episodes of #Employment Debate. Thank you and have a good night. Thank you.
Thanks to all of you. Thanks, Sandhya. Thank you
so much. Thank you so much for involving us in this discussion.
Thank you, Father Denzel, for joining.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Professor Shyam Sundar. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you.
So much.
Sandhya ma'am, from TIS, I'm a TIS alumni, so nice to see you.
Nice to see you, sir.
Thank you. Sasikumar.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, good night, everyone.
Good
Take
night.
care. Okay,
Thank you very
Arjun.
much.
Bye-bye.